Okay, folks, this could be a tricky one because it may involve some sort of personal sort of revelations or stories. It's This is entitled Mental Health, and I'd say it's possibly one of the most pressing issues on the planet at this stage. We've got unprecedented levels of increasing unprecedented levels of suicides, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. There's an epidemic in America. As we know, there are people hooked on legal prescription drugs, many of which actually kill people, and whose death reports are showing that they've suffered overdoses, and these are regulated kind of prescribed amounts they're taking. So we're in a sort of mental health crisis. I mean, the World Health Organization, whatever you think about them, they've done some maths on this stuff, and they're saying that one of the biggest killers on this planet is stress. What is stress? It's a mental health condition, right? So cancer's linked to stress, obesity is linked to stress, depression is linked to stress, anxiety is linked to stress, right? So all of this kind of fight or flight kind of human response involving fear and fighting and anxiety and so on and so forth, and probably changing levels of hormones. See Robert Sapolsky for this stuff. I mean, he's got a fabulously detailed account of hormones and what they do to behavior, and it's remarkable the predictive capacity that this gives anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists for predicting human behavior. But yeah, that's another story. This is about mental health. Okay. So first and foremost, why is everyone so sad? I mean, that's the simplest question. We can over kind of complicate diagnoses and so on and so forth, but people are wandering around not feeling happy, right? And after a certain period of time of not feeling happy, it starts taking a strain. Excuse me. Got bloody hay fever now. We've got sunshine. Just to add to my woes, which we'll get to. Why are people so unhappy? Well, I remember some old zoos that I used to go to as a kid, and they used to sort of leave me with this feeling of disquiet because I'd come home and I'd look back on some of the animals and how sad they seemed to look. So there was I think it was a chimpanzee at Southampton Zoo. It was just a horribly inadequately maintained zoo, and the animals weren't really kind of cared for properly. They weren't the natural sort of environments, not even aesthetically. There was no attempt made really. And there was one chimpanzee down there, I can't remember his name. I think he had some kind of local name. He was a bit of a local legend. He used to smoke and eat sweets and all this kind of stuff. So he had horrendous tooth decay. And you could just see in his eyes, from kind of primate to primate, you could see he was not happy and he resented us. And sometimes he would kind of gesture at us and try and scare kids and things like that. And you could just see that these weren't the behaviors of a chimpanzee in its natural environment, right? I mean, I know they can be nasty buggers, but this was depression, okay? And so I think humans have been taken out of their natural environment, and I think that environment is not a place, it is a sort of behavior. We've talked elsewhere, my talks entitled Everything Changes, Nothing Changes, discuss the kind of radical shift in humans' living arrangements since the agricultural revolution, right? I mean, there's some fuzzy areas around this, and we're not saying that we went crisply from a nomadic society to a settled, farming communities and so on. This is a long, drawn-out process, and I mean, there's still people living like nomads now. There are halfway betweens. There's agrarian lifestyles, and there's a bit of hunting, bit of farming, bit of fishing. But the key thing is that this place that I'm talking about that we no longer live isn't a physical location. It's a behavior. It's a place of motion and kind of embodied, enacted sort of interaction with your environment. And this is what I think has been sort of stripped away from human behavior, right? So we've boxed ourselves into little tenements. We're sort of densely packed, which is quite a new thing. Nomads would just probably feel extremely claustrophobic in a high rise, In fact, I think there's been some stuff like this, hasn't there, where the sort of primitive tribes have been brought into modern society and really sort of struggled with a paradigm shift and all this stuff. But I think this is partly the reason for depression. So we don't walk enough, we don't get enough fresh air, we're eating terrible foods, and we're doing mindless, repetitive jobs that millions of us, billions of us, just don't enjoy and find soulless and sort of unimaginative and uncreative, and also can't even see the benefit that it brings to the wider society. It might be, you're working for an accountancy or a bank or an insurance company, and you can just feel the futility of all of these numbers flying around, and seeing that nothing brilliant is really being delivered out of all of this effort. So there's no schools, hospitals, or accommodation or healthcare, anything like that sort of being delivered by this stuff. Just fiscal coins being bandied around. Okay, I know there's loads of arguments around this stuff and the necessity of insurance for investment and business prosperity, and so on and so forth. But I don't want to get into that now. I just want to talk about the basic fact of the matter, and that is that the human animal is living in radically, different conditions to those that it was living in sort of, 20, 30,000 years ago, right? And I think that that's the cause of our depression. So the body's wanting to do certain things. It has certain tendencies and inclinations that it sort of almost expects to be doing. With things like epigenetics and more recently with things like the sort of morphogenetics and morphic biology and stuff, bioelectric fields from Levin, and our memories can kind of transcend certain radical body changes, like the brains of caterpillars being turned to mush, and yet the butterfly still remembering some of the caterpillar's lessons and so on. So, the ideas of memory and practice and behavior is kind of, it's not about the individual and what is stored in the individual mind. It's what's stored in the overarching kind of bioarchitecture of this kind of foliating system, right? And, we're tangled up in that. And there's probably all sorts of kind of, higher level messaging going on of which we're a part, that we have no cognizance of, right? And so where did we get to there? What are we talking about? Mental health. So, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons for the mental health crisis. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own kind of experience with mental health as a sort of profession, and my own kind of inner account of it as well. So it all started for me really. My auntie was a psychiatric nurse, worked at a place called Tatchbury Mount, where we used to think it was horribly haunted, this place. But, lunatic asylums always get bad rep, don't they? And you hear screams in the night and stuff. They get spooky. But she was brilliant, and she, she was dealing with people who had sort of schizophrenia, and she reported that some of them had taken sort of one or two psychedelics and been triggered into these nightmare lifetime trips and all this kind of stuff. And that really used to freak me out when I was in my teenage years, possibly for obvious reasons. And so I, but it was interesting anyway. And so she introduced sort of certain thinkers to me, sort of Freud and Carl Jung and so on and so forth. So I had some understanding of the realm of psychology and psychiatry in my younger years. And then I got into kind of heavy science, and I thought, I got into this narrative that psychology was just sort of modern day astrology almost, and it's not, it's a pseudoscience. They don't really know what they're doing, and it's physics and maths and all that jazz and engineering and stuff that made real sense in my kind of atheist materialist outlook at that time, and just extremely ignorant and innocent outlook, which hasn't moved that further forward really. But I then got back interested in it a few years later. I did an access course because I left school with pretty much nothing, right? I think grade C's were my highest in anything. Got maths and English, which was fairly useful. But I got back into psychology, and I studied psychology as part of this access course. I did really, really well. I was getting like 98% on some of the essays and stuff, so I really got into it. And then I thought, you know what? I fancy becoming a counsellor. I want to be a therapist. I want to deploy some of these methods. And one of the methods I was quite interested in was the Carl Rogers kind of humanist approach. So it's called person-centered counseling, where in some sense what you're trying to do is empower the client to manage their own problems and to explain their own problems to themselves. So it sort of felt like I had a bit of a kind of cognitive psychology dimension to it as well. It's about habits of thought and so on. But it had a kind of psychoanalytic aspect to it as well. It's about sort of trying to, get them to expose what the kind of key narratives were in their lives that were causing some of their issues, right? Because that's what a lot of this stuff is. Worry is the worst sin. It's the way we characterize ourselves in our own stories that causes a lot of the trouble. If we characterize ourselves as an incompetent sort of loser that's not, keeping people happy, or nobody likes you, or sort of paranoid thoughts and stuff like that, you're not going to have a good time, are you? Because you are the embodiment of all of those thoughts, and so you have to live with this idea that you're some terrible person, right? And so find some ways around that. And but so I think this human-centered counselling was allowing people to kind of talk through those personal narratives, and hopefully to realise that they are just that. But I was, I did, I think, intermediate and advanced. So, I mean, I'm not even sure what a qualified counsellor is. I think anyone can sort of technically set themselves up, can't they? But it was good. But I realised, I think, halfway through the advanced course that it was just too much for me. I hadn't had enough life experience. I wasn't a strong enough emotional person. Probably still not, right? But the reason I did this was because people were coming to me at work with problems. And I always found that people would just kind of launch into these kind of really off the cuff, just, oh, this happened, that happened. And I won't name any names, but people just telling me some pretty dark and difficult secrets, right? And, why are people doing this? And, some of my other friends said, well, look, Matt, you're a good listener, right? I mean, some of my present company would laugh, it's, endlessly at that because they say it's hard to get a word in edgeways with me, but apparently I was a really good listener at the time, and so people came to me, and repeatedly so as well, and I started giving them advice. And so I thought, let's have a look at this counselling thing. Maybe I can earn more money doing counselling than insurance. And I bloody hated insurance as well, and that kind of led to, that was one of the factors in not a breakdown, but a kind of mini crisis I had when I was about 27. Anyway, that's another story. We'll get to that. And I was really curious about this counselling stuff, and we did role playing, and part of the role playing was pretending you were someone. But what we found invariably in the groups were people ended up using that avatar to talk about their own issues, and there was hugs and tears, and I just figured out that I wasn't strong enough to do it. But I did ask the counsellor one question because we were being taught these methodologies and techniques for getting the clients to open up. One of which was called it's called reflection. And the idea there is that if they're struggling with communication and stuff, what you need to do is prove to them that you've internalized what they're saying. So if someone says, oh, yeah, I'm having a terrible time in our marriage, right? And then they sort of seize up, give them time to speak. And then you could say something like, oh, so you're having problems at home, or with your wife or something, just to show, just say back to them in different words what they've said to you, just to confirm that you've internalized and digested what they're saying. And apparently that's part of being able to show empathy. But I asked her, we were taught a number of these sorts of techniques to, keep the session flowing and so on. And I said, is it possible to deploy these techniques in a kind of mechanical, unfeeling way? And is that what happens to really experienced counselors? You can just deliver it, like you're cranking handles on a machine. And she said, no, you can't do that. And I said, why not? And she said, well, because the patient would know that you didn't care. And I was like, well, but if you followed all the techniques and, you check your body language and manage your own conduct in that session, then why wouldn't that be good enough? And, and I probably started pissing her off, to be honest. I did that quite a bit back then, but, she didn't really have an answer, but I think the answer lay within the sort of the mystical in a way. She said, there's some sort of unspoken feeling going on between the client and the counsellor, right? So yeah, so I had a brush with mental health there. I then went on to work for the Winchester Alliance for Mental Health in an internet cafe. Actually, it was called the Bite Cafe. We won awards. We were pretty fantastic, really. And so it was open to the public, so just ordinary folk, in inverted commas, could just come and go, use the internet, have a coffee, have a biscuit. But we were also working with a local mental health group, so there were kids with learning difficulties, kids with severe mental health problems, and so on and physical disabilities as well. So there were some real challenges around, mouse usage, and back then the accessibility, was just getting off the ground on PCs and stuff. So visual impairment software and stuff. We were just using some of that for the first time, and it was brilliant because we were getting some of these guys qualified on the ECDL. That was, I don't know whether it even runs anymore. It was like an IT qualification on Microsoft Excel and Word and stuff like that. So we had these guys that kind of, some of them were really depressed and they had no direction, but they were getting a bit of spark of light in their life through, learning spreadsheets and stuff. And I just love these. I love spreadsheets and tech and stuff. So I enjoyed teaching them as well. And so this was mental health, but we did some sort of mental health training there. And I remember sort of asking a philosophical question. I said, look, because it seemed that the whole paradigm really of mental health was about getting people to be independent and getting them into a normal home and into society, or back into society. And I just asked this question. I said, well, in some sense, isn't it this society that's causing the mental health? And so why is it necessarily the thing to do to sort of put them in there? Because there's all kinds of pressures and things that, perhaps they're just not designed to deal with for whatever reason, right? And they said, well, no, because this is the measure of their mental health. This is the measure of their wellness, their ability to function within mainstream society. Then that obviously got me thinking about this idea that sort of many moons ago, people that heard voices and had visions and stuff may well have been promoted to the village shaman, right? And maybe they would have seen symbols and had rituals around some of these hallucinations and so on and so forth. But these days we lock them up and say, well, you're unwell because you can't function within this kind of quite mechanized society we've built for ourselves, right? This very heavily rule-based system we've got. And so, my point there is that sort of mental health is perhaps not it's not an objective thing. It's a kind of socially relative thing. Yeah. So even to this day, there could be someone with what we would describe as severe mental health conditions running around being a really awesome shaman and being celebrated in a tribe somewhere in Namibia. Maybe not a great example, but um, you know, so mental health is a culturally relative thing. I mean, I know that there are cases where people are just, having an extremely difficult time because of this. So I'm not playing this stuff down, but it does have that cultural sort of relativity. Um, why am I talking about mental health? So thinking about disagreements and arguments and aggression and so on within relationships, can that ever be sort of seen as a healthy thing, right? In relationships I've had, that I've been known to sort of get into sort of squabbles, nothing horrible and physical or anything like that, but kind of, bickering and sort of disagreements and miscommunications and so on and so forth. And it sort of feels sometimes that that relationship is a single creature that kind of goes through its own sort of emotional ecology. And there's something about sort of having a bit of a clash with someone, raising your voice and getting a bit hot round the collar and huffing and puffing, and then coming through that and say, I'm sorry, and having a hug and a kiss and, making a cup of tea or something. There's something strangely kind of satisfying about completing that ritual. And I wonder whether there's just this kind of shared kind of biorhythmic, you know, process, sort of ghostly process that couples go through and families go through, where sometimes the whole single animal of the family just needs to have a bloody good roar. And yeah, I mean, I come from a family that we were quite emotional, very affectionate, lots of hugs, lots of shouting, but we'd never go to bed on bad terms. There'd always be tears and an apology at the end. So we would get stuff off our chest, but it generally didn't fester, and we wouldn't hold grudges, right? Because it would just be, well, look, here's my sodding opinion. Here's yours. Probably never the twain shall meet. Let's shout about it, and then let's have a hug and remember that there's being family transcends this stuff, and that's what's more important. That's how it used to go with us anyway. And I think that there's been some gloom and misery in my family. It just as there has in all. But I think this is a pretty healthy way to go, and to resist the sort of dark side, if you like. I mean, there's dotted line to Carl Jung here, the idea of the shadow work, to be able to say, well, look, I know I'm not perfect, right? And instead of beating myself up about it and going to confessions and try and aspire to some unrealistic, pristine, perfect kind of model of myself, I'm just going to accept that I'm a damn well, primordial sort of lizard brain with propensities to ridiculous, irrational behaviour, right? And I'm going to get myself into a mess sometimes because of that, right? And I can be selfish, I can be rude, I can be brash, presumptuous, and I can be lazy. I can be all of these things that at some point are going to, ruffle feathers, right? And if you didn't have any of those properties, well, you're either lying or you really are truly perfect and sort of angelic in some way, right? Because we're just mammals that you really fundamentally just want to eat well, sleep well, and gather together and have a dance and then go back to bed and rinse and repeat. We involve ourselves in a whole host of rituals and complex details and so on that just seem to cause us stress, right? So anyway, I think that's probably a good spot to leave it. I've got a lot more to say about this stuff, and of a more of a sort of philosophical nature. And I'm going to talk about psychedelics, schizophrenia and shamanism, and just the general unhappiness across society and what we could potentially do about it. Okay, all right. Well, thanks very much, guys. I hope you enjoy that. Speak soon. Bye.